What is good, everyone? We are back doing another chapter review, and for this one we're covering chapter 1094, where we last left off in 1093. Atlas had just gained control of the pacifistas, and of course she was very confident that everything had been under control now, because in her mind the Vegapunks had the highest command authority on the island. But little did she know they actually had the second highest behind Saturn, who was on the island himself, who had just taken note of what happened and how the tides were shifting. The Marines were getting decimated as the pacifistas changed sides, and in the middle of all of this, Bonnie was missing, so team set out to try to find her to save her and everything, and Sanji was pretty much leading the charge, which is interesting because people were getting on Sanji for weeks because he let things happen that normally somebody of his character wouldn't allow, such as Stussy getting nearly taken out by Lucci and Bonnie herself getting attacked by Kizaru. But I don't think that was a big deal, honestly, because those are things that sort of had to happen to move the plot forward. You know, they had to be in place for certain other things to happen. But anyway, Sanji, using his sixth sense or intuition or whatever you want to call it, was able to help them locate Bonnie. And then we see that she's being attacked by Marines. This is where things got really confusing for me because of the way Bonnie was using her fruit. And it's always been a mystery because, number one, we don't even know what it's called. We don't have a name for it. We just assume that this fruit is for aging people and de-aging people, as well as Bonnie having the ability to use that fruit on herself. Basically Shinobu's ability, but then with the added advantage of doing it in reverse as well. But now we know that couldn't be further from the truth. Her fruit is so much more versatile than that, to the point that she can also age people into different realities or alternate versions of themselves that would have happened if their life would have gone a different way. In this chapter, she does something I can't exactly easily explain myself because she uses an attack called near-death experience. So I'm not sure if she's able to make them hallucinate and see their own death, or if she's aging them to the point that they get close to death, but not all the way to the point that they die. But then that raises even more questions for me, because if she's aging them close to death, why not just age them all the way to the point that they're seconds away from dying and then just let them die? Unless, of course, there's a sense of humanity in her that wouldn't allow her to do this, and that she's choosing to spare them while evading them at the same time. One insanely interesting theory that I've heard is that Bonnie's fruit is actually the same one that Toki had that allowed her to jump forward in time. Now, this might be a stretch, but honestly, this is One Piece, so we all know you have to keep your mind open with these sort of things at all times. So based on what I've heard from the theory and some things I've pieced together on my own, is that it might be the case that maybe Toki had the same fruit, but what she was doing was the awakened version or the unawakened ability. And maybe what Bonnie does, maybe those are the base abilities. They may very well be two different fruits, but all we do know for sure is that they are two fruits that alter the time stream or alter reality according to time in some way. But moving on from all of that, that's when we see that there's a pacifista heading straight for Bonnie. And strangely, to her surprise, this one hasn't changed sides. This one is still attacking her. It turns out it was one of the Vice Admiral's devil fruit that allows her to still control the pacifista and have it bend to her will. She has the Ride Drive fruit, which allows her to hijack and take control of anything that she chooses. So this is a very bad moment for Bonnie because, as we all know, she doesn't have the ability to attack the pacifistas as they have her dad's face on them. In this moment, she gets weak and leaves herself vulnerable for attack, and had it not been for Sanji noticing this and very quickly swooping in to save her, that would have been the end of her. That's when Sanji starts to sympathize with her and give her a bit of a pep talk, letting her know that he knows that Kuma is her dad and why moments like these are very difficult for her, but she still has to keep her head in the game. She has to keep a calm mind, or she risks dying and putting those around her in danger as well. So then he takes her and they head for safety inside the Vega tank, and that's when we transition to the whole thing with Luffy and Kizaru. Their fight is still going on, and then once more things are made clear that these guys, their goal isn't to beat each other. They have a mission to complete, and Kizaru feels like he's wasting time being stalled by Luffy. Luffy feels like he's doing a good job. He's doing what he set out to do, keeping Kizaru at bay and keeping him away from Vegapunk. That's when Kizaru was like, okay, this is too much. I can't just keep staying here and letting you distract me while I'm trying to do what I have to do. So then he super speeds out of there. That's when we get a panel of him, Luffy, Zoro, and Lucci being very shocked. And Jinbei even asks, what is this ominous presence? So clearly Saturn's aura was emanating across the island to the point the most powerful people around were even thrown off. And I don't think we ever had anything quite like this before, especially at this stage of the game, in the final saga, among these very powerful people. But that's when Saturn sends out an order telling the pacifistas to cease all their actions immediately, and Atlas realizes what's going on. The only way this is possible is if someone with higher command authority is on the island and giving them these orders, and there's only one group with this sort of authority, the Gorosei. So clearly one of them is on the island right now. And that's when things get even stranger, because the way Saturn got on the island is through a summoning circle that appears on the ground. So it starts to make you wonder what's going on here, because we've never seen anything like this before. We've never seen a summoning circle allowing people to teleport or move from place to place in One Piece. I can't even tell if this is a devil fruit ability of his or something the Gorosei are able to do on their own, or some sort of ability or magic that they're able to access. Overall, the things that happen in this chapter just begin to throw our sense of understanding and our idea of what the power system is completely off, especially with what happened next. So the Marines are instructed to not look directly at Saturn if they're low-ranking Marines. And what happens when one disobeys these orders? His head pops right off just by a glance. And this is crazy. Nothing like this has ever happened before, and I'm surprised that Oda even drew it. But it looks like it's a sort of reminder at just how real things are about to get and how serious the stakes are at this stage in the story. As far as what happened, people are trying to figure out if this is Conqueror's Haki or something else entirely. If you ask me, I'm not sure if it's Conqueror's Haki because of the way we know that Conqueror's Haki works. It doesn't require you to look at somebody's eyes. Just being in the presence of somebody using it is enough for somebody to be overwhelmed if they're not strong enough. And that's when we see Saturn having already been transformed. As many people have predicted, him, along with probably the rest of the Gorosei, are yokai, making use of mythical Zou and devil fruits as far as we understand, and Saturn is even awakened, and he immediately shows up in his awakened form. And you know, this is where you really start to question stuff with the Beast Pirates and why none of them were awakened. And then beyond that is the fact that Yamato had these clouds in her hybrid form, but nobody ever went out and said this is an awakened form, or Oda never made it clear that she was awakened herself. So it makes things very confusing in retrospect looking back at the stuff that happened in Wano. And honestly, you can very much excuse the lower ranking Beast Pirates not being awakened themselves, but then you have Kaido, one of the strongest in the world, and he wasn't awakened. And then there's a whole thing about how his mind simply didn't catch up with his body. So who knows, honestly, maybe he just didn't have it in him. Maybe he just wasn't built for that. Maybe it's a thing where you really have to hone in on the connection between the mind and the body if you truly want to reach this next level of devil fruit mastery. But now let's move on to where Kizaru actually finds Vegapunk and he's able to attack him, but he happens to miss. That's when Luffy's finally able to catch up and he charges up an attack against Kizaru, and Kizaru points out the fact that he should be at his limit already. So he's very much aware of the timer that Gear 5 has. Somehow though, the community thought that this was a thing of the past and he wouldn't have to deal with the Gear 5 time limit and all of that. This is why I've said in previous videos that I think Kizaru is stronger than Luffy, not because he has stronger attack power, but because he is a better combatant in the way that he does not have to deal with the time limit himself and can fight for as long as he needs to at a very high level. And this is one of the things that holds Luffy back because he isn't at that stage yet. Now, another thing that I did see is people were wondering, why is the time limit so short? It seems shorter than it was with Kaido. Two things though I have to say on that is, number one, the fight with Kaido once he turned into Gear 5, it wasn't that long. And number two, if it was in fact shorter, it could be the case that Luffy is having to use so much speed to keep up with Kizaru to the point that he has even less time to use the form, because he's burning even more energy. Just like, you know, when Sanji was using his super speed form to fight Queen, it zapped through his stamina very quickly. You know, when he was moving so fast that it looked like he disappeared. So Luffy charges up an attack for Kizaru, and it's very similar to the one that he used on Kaido, except I think this one is on a completely different level just because of what it took to do the attack. So he pumps up his muscle, and I think he begins to spin to power it up even further. And then he launches an attack on Kizaru that lands on his head. I think it even has streams of flame on it if you look even closer. This attack is called White Star Gun, and it is extremely powerful from what we can tell. So Luffy himself begins to fall down as he acknowledges that he is at his limit. And people often have been saying this is no issue at all. He can just restart his heart like he did with Kaido and continue fighting. But I think this is a bit different because against Kaido, Kaido was the one that told him he's at his limit. And Luffy said, nonsense, I'm not at my limit at all. This time, Luffy is the one acknowledging that he's at his limit. He's the one that's saying it outright. So I think this is going to be one of those classic cases where Luffy needs some time to regain his energy as everybody else helps him to buy some time in some way. As far as Kizaru goes, some people think this is it. Kizaru just got one shot at, he's done. Luffy defeated him. Now, I don't think this is the case because I think Admiral's endurance has been portrayed to be very high, and I don't think this attack is enough to take Kizaru out, considering Akainu and Aokiji were able to fight at this level for 10 straight days. At the same time, I will say if Kizaru is in fact out, I think there's ways to make sense of that. You know, I always get on Katakuri for not having good endurance, and the fact of the matter is, that's because he refuses to take attacks. He refuses to take damage because of his overdependence on future sight. To gain greater endurance, you have to constantly take attacks and build it up over time. It can make sense that Kizaru is the same way, with the fact that it is very easy for him to dodge attacks. If he's been exploiting this advantage for too long, that can mean that his ability to endure has become severely limited. But I don't think that's the case, because when you're an admiral, you have to prepare for all sorts of situations. Just look look at the way the scabbards thought the fire attacks would work because that seemed to be Green Bull's weakness, but he told them, "You're up against a naval admiral. Why would such an obvious weakness be effective against me?" Because remember, at the end of the day, this is a job title. There has to be extreme attention to detail if you want to keep this job. Whatever the case might be though, I think this attack did do significant damage, whether Kizaru was able to get up or he's lights out. I think this attack was significant. At the bare minimum, he'll get up and rub his head, acknowledging the pain. Then we transition towards the end of the chapter. That's when Saturn appears. He sees Luffy coming down and he acknowledges him and says, "Nika." And that's when things start to flash back in Bonnie's head to the day that Kuma's mind was taken away. It looks like what Bonnie remembers is that Saturn was responsible. He was the one that gave the order. So she attacks him immediately. He takes a sword and she stabs him right in the torso. So this is clearly going to lead into some crazy developments into the next chapter. What I'm most interested to see is what exactly is Saturn gonna do and what abilities does he have with his devil fruit? Is Bonnie gonna survive? Is Vegapunk even gonna make it out of this arc? On top of that, how powerful are these 5 elders? Because I'm not gonna lie, this chapter has opened up my mind even more into how strong they can be. Because me personally, I think because of old age, they are weaker than the emperors and the admirals, but I am not opposed to the idea that they even surpass them. One thing that I think is important for these discussions is that we have to be able to adapt. You know, I get we have our favorite characters, favorite factions, all that stuff, but if it gets to the point that we have allegiance to these groups, that we're not even willing to entertain the possibility of being wrong, to the point that when we're wrong, we call it bad writing. Before we do all that, we should try to make sense of it first. Like with my take on Kizaru versus Luffy, as much as I say Kizaru is stronger and more capable, there can be logic in place to make Luffy the superior combatant, despite how I view the dynamic and what disadvantage that I think Luffy has. But anyway, those are all my thoughts on this chapter. But as always, tell me what you think. Comment all your thoughts down below. Give me your 1095 predictions. Also, tell me if your opinion of Luffy and Kizaru has changed after these recent chapters. Comment all your thoughts down below, but also don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more videos just like this one.